Hello and welcome from Ideas to Impact Nexus Conversations, the podcast exploring the ideas, people, and partnerships shaping higher education. My name is Chris Campbell, and I'm the Nexus Fellow at UNSW Canberra.
And I'm Saragi Turnip, Nexus Educational Developer from the Faculty of Medicine and Health.
At the recent HERDSA 2026 conference in Singapore, we invited some of our UNSW colleagues to reflect on one question. What conversation, session, or encounter changed your thinking?
Their responses moved between the immediate realities of teaching and much larger question about system, relationship, disciplinary boundaries, and educational innovation.
This is not a summary of every keynote or presentation. Instead, it is a reflection on what happens around the conference, during roundtables, between sessions, over coffee, and on the journey home.
Throughout the episode, you will hear from colleagues across higher education. We will pause between their reflection to consider what connects their perspective and what those perspectives might mean for our own work.
So, what happens when conference conversations continue between the session room, and how might these conversations move from ideas to impact? Let's begin by widening the frame. One idea I keep returning to at HERDSA was that educational impact rarely sits within a single course, workshop, or project. It develops through connections between people, programs, institutions, and wider communities.
Several delegates describe a similar shift in scale, looking closely at teaching practice while also asking how that practice sits within a much larger system. Rita captured that movement between the granular and the systemic.
Well, it's been my first time at the HERDSA conference. Yeah, it's been really insightful to explore the challenges, but also the ways forward that people might be thinking about in higher education. And so, what I guess I appreciate from HERDSA is the breadth of the presentations as well as the posters. And I also appreciate the fact that you can just reflect at a granular level within your teaching practice, as well as asking bigger questions and really thinking about more at a macro level and how we tackle some more complex challenges in higher education.
Kalli described the conference as an invitation to move beyond his disciplinary and institutional bubble.
It's been a fantastic conference. It's my first time here at HERDSA, and it's changed the way I think of things, I guess, because I'm so focused in my discipline and bubble in my little faculty in my university, and now I've been forced to think about the greater system. So systems thinking's come up quite a lot, even just in our keynotes as well, but in other roundtables that I've done, and so it's forced me to think in the bigger picture, which I think is the whole purpose of an organization like this. It's higher education in general. And there's so much more than a university. There's colleges, there's all different kinds of training institutes that are included under this big umbrella. And we're all kind of working together for the same sort of cause. And so, so I guess it's systems thinking and understanding how it all fits together and how what we do influences other parts of the university and the institution.
Patsie connected system thinking with resilience, community, and empathy.
I guess building resilience and using systems thinking as an approach to addressing future challenges, not only for our students, but also for us as teachers. So to me, that's been the most provocative and really transformative way of thinking, this systems approach to the way we build community, build empathy, it's not transactional.
Anita then brought the larger idea back into a specific teaching context.
So I suppose I've had some time to sit back and reflect on how I could implement what I'm listening to into my own teaching. The keynotes were really great for that. I've been thinking a lot about sort of pedagogical leadership from the first talk and also the last talk around teaching empathy in leadership, and also the systems thinking aspect of the final keynote around how I might fit that into my postgraduate public health course around systems thinking around the health systems and how I might kind of strengthen that in my course. So it's been really great to sort of just think about, tweaks and minor changes and how I might implement them later on. So
What connects those responses is movement between levels. People are zooming out to see the wider system, then returning to their own context to decide what they can change.
A systems perspective is only useful if it sharpens practice rather than distancing us from it.
And once we see the wider system, another question emerges: who participates in shaping it?
Once people widened the frame, they did not lose sight of the people within it. Several delegates returned to students, not only as recipients of education, but as contributors to its design.
G's reflection extended the ideas from individual practices to a broader typology of partnership.
I guess one conversation that I've had is the setting up of a students as partner typology from Linda Heath from the Griffith University. So it gets us to think about students as partner or partnership in different layers, different categories, or different ways of trying to approach this practice.
The next two voices take the argument further. They suggest that relationship and empathy are not optional addition to innovation. They are part of what makes transformation possible.
I think more than anything, I've realized how important it is to be human in our relationships with our colleagues, with our students, and that we have to keep centering the value of relationships when we're talking about transformative change, because that's the only way change happens.
Tahmina brought together human connection, empathy, and students' capacity to act as partners and change makers.
I've learned so much. It was too many things that I'm taking back home, honestly. But there are a few key things that I was really happy and surprised to see is that it's coming back to the core. We are thinking about connection, human connection. We are thinking about how transformative it can be when students are working with us as partners. We are thinking about students as change makers, as our keynote speaker Sarah mentioned, right? And then we are also thinking about empathy, right? So these are a few values that are so me, which is why I'm just happy that we are coming back. It's not about just innovating what we already have, nurturing that, bringing empathy in class, working with the students and see how they can transform the learning experience. That's what I'm taking back. Yeah.
That challenges a familiar assumption that innovation is mainly about introducing something new.
These voices suggest it is about whose knowledge counts, who participates, and how people experience the process.
They also remind us that useful ideas do not always come from the disciplines or contexts we expect.
One of the particular strengths of multidisciplinary conferences is that an idea can arrive from somewhere unexpected.
The most productive response is not simply to copy it. It is to ask what principles sit beneath the example and what that principle might reveal in another context.
For Steve from engineering, A session on language education created a new way of thinking about employability.
Yesterday I was in a talk about how to teach languages, and the teacher showed a rubric for languages and ability at speaking the language. And the line that struck me was talking about stories and the ability of students to be able to create stories. Now, I teach postgraduate students in Australia many of who are international students and are having trouble getting jobs. And of course, to get a job, the most important thing is to be able to tell a story that resonates with the employer. And so what I realized from that was maybe my students are having difficulty putting it together as a story. So that's something I need to think about.
Mei Lim found a different connection through a poster on international students' understanding of leadership.
Okay, so today I saw a poster by Brilliant. So that's the name of the master student from UNSW School of Education. I think the conference gave us a bit of time to actually sit down and talk to each other. Nonetheless, what I saw was Brilliant was working on how international students conceptualize leadership. And quite often, because of their cultural background, it can be very different to how everyone else in Australia conceptualize leadership. And unless we actually understand how they do it, often group work is poorly scaffolded. And that creates all the conflict that we see in our group work. So in Brilliant's poster, I saw a lot of what I actually saw in my practice. I thought, yeah, I did see that too. And what's good talking to Brilliant is that I have one person who is an expert in this area that I can talk to then go, in the near future, if I want to redesign engineering courses, where the students are better supported in their leadership of their team, how do I do it? That was extremely helpful.
Kalli encountered another unexpected connection, a trauma-informed approach to education presented in accounting and taxation.
And another moment that stood out for me was it was a trauma-informed approach, which is obviously something we like to include in our clinical skills teaching or future medical practitioners. But it came from a tax accountant. This guy was so passionate about people and human beings. And I just thought, and he works in the Northern Territory in Darwin with First Nation people. So it was in that context as well. And just, it was so inspiring to see the kind of work he's done. He's only works in the public sector, so clearly he cares about people. And it was just so good to see, because it mimics the kind of work we do, Silas and I, with training our students to be person-centered and empathic and understanding the background of where people come from. And he's doing it in this context of accounting and tax,
These are not examples of simply transferring a teaching techniques unchanged.
Language education becomes a lens on employability. Research on culturally situated leadership becomes a resource for redesigning engineering group work. Trauma-informed accounting prompts reflection on person-centered clinical practice.
Each person notices an underlying principle and asks what it might reveal in their own context.
That may be one of the distinctive functions of a multidisciplinary conference. Ideas can travel, but they can still need to be interpreted and adapted.
And the idea traveling across almost every disciplinary boundary at HERDSA was inevitably artificial intelligence.
Our opening captured some of the fatigue surrounding AI. The longer conversations, however, were neither uncritical enthusiasm nor blanket rejection.
They focus on judgment, validity, professional relevance, and what happens when a promising idea has to work at scale.
Gavin described a conversation on the MRT, or the train, that shifted his position on AI-assisted feedback.
Well, actually it happened in the MRT on the way home yesterday, but I had a conversation about using AI through a thing called Feedback Kitchen, and what it does is you plug in all of your rubric and you then the human element is you make a decision as to where that student belongs on the rubric across all of your factors. And it then generates, I'd call it raw text, or they call it cooked text, from the rubric to build up feedback, which is very aligned to the rubric. So the human's still involved, but the AI is generating some of the prose and always aligning it with the rubric. And while I'd be interested in exploring that, I think the way I'd work with it, particularly at scale, if I had 180 students, would be use that as my baseline to give them feedback. And the guy said to me that it's particularly good for oral presentations. He said it works really well and he gets fantastic student response and satisfaction from the quality of the feedback. So that's shifted my view a little, even though I understand why we need to hold a line on not having AI do the work of the human input in our feedback.
Silas widened the lens from a single feedback process to the challenge educators are experiencing across faculties.
But I think also just seeing that bigger picture much more obviously, like it's clear from our work in Nexus, because we see it across all the faculties, the struggle that educators are having in the Gen AI saturated environment. How do I set a written assignment, and does it have any validity anymore? But through to, how do I use AI to improve my teaching? And, I've seen some extraordinary examples of incredibly detailed and comprehensive work that people are putting into use of AI, that how thoughtful they are about it, the ethical implications.
He then raised a challenge that often appears after a successful pilot or demonstration: scale.
Just a session earlier on AI virtual patients in a pharmacy program where one of the academics has created 200 cases and has put a really detailed kind of approach into that. I shudder at the thought of her. We talked about it a little bit towards the end of her deploying those at scale, because that's the real challenge. You can make the assets, but deploying them at scale is a huge challenge, particularly as you scale up the number of users. She was talking about thousands of students using them.
That distinction matters. Creating a promising educational resource is not the same as creating the conditions through which we can work reliably.
An idea may be technically possible and educationally valuable, but impact depends on what happens around it: human judgment, infrastructure, support, governance, and the realities of implementation.
Across these AI reflections, the most useful question was not simply, can we use it?
It was, what educational purpose does it serve? Where should human judgment remain? And what would responsible implementation require? Across the voices in this episode, impact did not begin with a finished solution. It began with a shift in attention.
A language rubric made someone reconsider employability. A poster opening the possibility of a new collaboration. A keynote prompted changes to a public health course. A conversation on the MRT shifted a position on AI-assisted feedback.
Some of those changes were systemic, others were small adjustments to teaching, but each began with someone becoming willing to see their work differently.
The next step is translation, asking what this idea means here for these learners in this context and what would be required to put it into practice responsibly.
So, as we close, we invite you to consider one question. What conversation has changed your thinking, and what will you now do with it?
Thank you to everyone who shared their reflections with us at HERDSA 2026.
And thank you for listening from Ideas to Impact Nexus Conversation.
Until next time, keep the conversation moving and keep exploring how ideas become impact.
This episode from Ideas to Impact Nexus Conversation was hosted and produced by Chris Campbell and myself, Diana Saragi Turnip. This episode is recorded by Brian Landrigan and edited by Anne Nguyen from the PVCE Media and Immersive team.
The conference conversations were recorded during HERDSA's 2026 conference with contributions from Gavin, G, Steve, May, Sharon, Patsie, Anita, Kalli, Silas, Rita, and Tahmina. Thank you for listening.